It is 11 p.m., and you swear you are going to close the laptop and go to sleep. Instead, you open one more app. You know checking your phone disrupts your focus. You know the sugar spike from a third cookie will be followed by a crash. Yet, with perfect self-awareness of the harm, you execute the behavior anyway. Culturally, we tend to view this discrepancy between knowledge and action as a moral failing, labeling it a lack of willpower or a character flaw. But the biology of behavior suggests a different explanation. Look at this proportional model. The human brain makes up roughly 2% of our total body weight, yet it consumes around 20% of the body's energy at rest. The brain operates under a strict baseline metabolic constraint. Conscious, deliberate thought, weighing options, imagining outcomes, and exercising restraint is some of the most energy-intensive work your nervous system performs. Because evolution ruthlessly favors efficiency, it built a system to minimize how often you have to do this expensive processing. Habits comprise a specific category of learned behavior, built to offload actions to fast, cheap, automatic circuitry. This process frees up mental bandwidth for whatever is novel or demanding in your environment. A bad habit reflects an efficient biological system doing exactly what it evolved to do, making repeated actions require less thought and less energy over time. Psychologists divide human behavior into two broad frameworks. Goal-directed behavior is deliberate. You evaluate an outcome and choose a path to achieve it. Habitual behavior is automatic, triggered immediately by a cue without any conscious evaluation of the outcome. When you first acquire a new skill, say driving a manual transmission car, every gear shift requires your full attention. This early learning phase heavily engages the prefrontal cortex, the brain center for complex planning and conscious decision-making. As the behavior is repeated, the neurological activity visibly migrates. The prefrontal cortex quiets down, and control of the behavior is handed off deep into a set of interconnected regions called the basal ganglia. Within the basal ganglia, control transfers between two distinct internal loops. The associative loop handles early learning and is highly sensitive to the value of a reward. But over time, the sensory motor loop takes over. It cares almost exclusively about the cue. Researchers demonstrated this structural handoff by observing rats trained to press a lever for food pellets. They designed an experiment to test what would happen to the animal's behavior if the reward was devalued. Early in the training process, the scientists introduced a compound that made the rats sick from that specific food. The rats immediately stopped pressing the lever. Their behavior was still goal-directed, controlled by the associative loop that cared about the outcome. But a different group of rats was allowed to repeat the lever pressing thousands of times before the food was poisoned. When those animals were made sick, they kept right on pressing the lever for food they no longer wanted to eat. The behavior had shifted entirely to the sensory motor loop. The physical action was now disconnected from the value of the reward. The association between the cue and the behavior had become independent of the outcome. This physical shift in the brain's circuitry explains why logical arguments fail against bad habits. Telling yourself an action is harmful activates the prefrontal cortex, but the habit itself is running on basal ganglia circuitry that isn't listening. Popular science often refers to dopamine as the pleasure chemical, but neuroscientists track it differently. Dopamine is actually a molecule of prediction and wanting, driving you to seek out a reward rather than purely enjoy it. This graph illustrates dopamine during a new experience. The chemical surge occurs here when a reward is received. But once a cue reliably predicts that reward, the dopamine spike migrates backwards. It fires the moment you encounter the cue, before the reward arrives. This mechanism is known as reward prediction error. It means the anticipation triggered by the buzz of a phone or the sight of a bakery becomes a stronger motivating force than the actual content of the notification or the taste of the pastry. These dopamine surges are chemical signals, but over time they build physical infrastructure in the brain. Every time a neural pathway is used, the repeated activation physically strengthens the synaptic connections between the neurons, a process called long-term potentiation. Simultaneously, those frequently used pathways undergo myelination. The physical nerve fibers are wrapped in a thickening fatty sheath that insulates the circuit and increases the speed at which electrical signals travel along it. Because these pathways are physically built into the brain's architecture, they are never truly erased. When a habit is broken, the neural circuit does not disappear, it merely lies dormant. This explains why relapse occurs with startling speed. Encountering an old physical environment or an emotional trigger immediately reactivates that heavily myelinated dormant hardware, bypassing the prefrontal cortex entirely. The brain's reward system was calibrated for an ancestral environment defined by severe caloric and social scarcity. Craving sugar ensured survival, and securing social approval meant staying in the safety of the group. Operating in that scarce environment, biology hardwired us with temporal discounting, a biological mandate to overvalue immediate, certain payoffs over delayed, uncertain consequences. This mechanism dictates the stickiness of modern habits. A cigarette delivers an instant chemical hit to the brain within seconds, while the cost of lung damage is delayed by decades. Fast, certain reward. Slow, uncertain cost. This preference for immediacy is amplified when the reward is unpredictable. In the mid-20th century, psychologist B.F. Skinner found that behaviors are most resistant to extinction when rewards are delivered on a variable ratio schedule. Unpredictability is the core of this mechanical design. You don't know which pull of a slot machine will pay off, so you keep pulling. Digital products use this exact variable reward structure. We scroll endlessly through feeds to soothe boredom, or check notifications to relieve social anxiety. The behaviors act as fast, reliable ways to regulate uncomfortable internal cues. Fighting these deeply ingrained patterns requires deliberate restraint from the prefrontal cortex. But self-control is a fluctuating, depletable resource. This leaves the brain highly vulnerable. At the end of the day or during high stress, when that cognitive capacity runs low. All of these forces converge into an evolutionary mismatch. Modern bad habits are the predictable result of an ancient, efficiency-obsessed neural system colliding with an environment engineered specifically to hijack it. Relying on sheer willpower to overcome this mismatch is neurologically doomed. You simply cannot consistently overpower a deeply myelinated, automated basal ganglia circuit using an easily depleted prefrontal cortex every time. As this diagram of the habit loop shows, you cannot simply delete an old neural pathway. Instead, you build neuroplastic competition. You keep the original cue and reward, but insert a new, competing routine attached to that exact same trigger. The single most effective way to install that new routine is through environmental design, utilizing a concept known as friction. Friction is the small steps, effort, or inconveniences standing between a cue and a behavior. By dropping a barrier into this pathway, increasing friction for bad habits and decreasing it for good ones, you redirect the brain's preference for automaticity down a healthier path. You can reinforce this new path through implementation intentions. This is a formal, psychological plan where you decide in advance, when this specific situation occurs, I will execute this specific behavior. Preloading this decision gives the slower, deliberate part of your brain a crucial head start. It allows the exhausted prefrontal cortex to initiate a strong competing response before the fast automatic craving sequence even begins. Ultimately, durable change requires targeting the underlying emotional function the habit serves. If you suppress a surface behavior without addressing the anxiety, stress, or boredom driving it, a new negative habit will simply take its place. Breaking a habit is a mechanical process of neuroplastic rewiring. It requires environmental engineering, strategic friction, and patience. Your brain is a remarkably efficient student. With the right cues, rewards, and repetition, it will rewrite its own wiring.